Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com. You can find cool stuff in stock every day, and check out our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. And finally, check out our new Alter Sleeves. Get your custom sleeve image of the Magic Mike's crew at altersleeves.com/magicmikes. I'm Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell, that way, Ruben Bressler.
Hold it together, Aaron.
You gotta keep it in there. Don't back it up.
We had a very silly pre-show. And I was trying to make it through past the finish line.
Professional. As I bump my microphone. Professional.
Right. We also began with our choice of the top comment from last week in the segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most eloquent, letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 multicolored humans. Ruben?
A lot of great multicolored humans out there, obviously, but I really liked Robert McGuire's comment. If you want to talk about unassuming cards that grease decks, look no further than Mantis Rider, referenced by Evan and Ruben. It's just a French vanilla creature, just a 3-mana lightning angel, but it's modern humans' most aggressive threat.
Yeah, this is the card that I tell people to focus on. Modern humans is a lot like modern merfolk. It's very easy to tunnel. It's very easy to see the sheer number of creatures and lose sight of the creatures that actually matter. And usually if you're on the dredge side of things, the only creature you really care about is Mantis Rider. Like, you can gum up the board nicely with a lot of your things, but you really have to keep the air full, because otherwise that's the thing that's going to keep getting over and pecking at you. But if you can at least get rid of the Mantis Riders, you can do this. And so that's the card I always tell people to focus, identify the creature you really care about, because otherwise you're going to waste time and be like, I need to get rid of the Thalia's Lieutenant. And you're like, that's the least of your problems.
Right. Yeah, the thing that's interesting about humans from a tribal deck perspective is that a lot of the lords in the other popular tribal decks are the things you want to care about. Mm-hmm. Either granting evasion like Lord of Atlantis or Gale Rider Sliver, or doing some other big giant effect like in Elves or Goblins. Mantis Rider and the humans deck is unique because the engine and the lords are not the quote-unquote biggest threats. They spread out their threats a lot more interestingly, and Mantis Rider is the only creature with flying in the deck, as far as I can think of.
A kite sail freebooter.
Oh yeah, freebooters in it. Freebooter doesn't hit very hard, though.
Yeah. Right.
Mantis Rider, that thing packs a punch.
For those who don't know, it is a rare from Khans of Tarkir. It's a red, white, and a blue mana for a 3/3 human monk that has flying, vigilance, and haste.
And if we did 3-color humans as opposed to just multicolor humans, it probably would have been our number one.
It would have been our number one, for sure. Well, we certainly appreciate Mr. Robert McGuire for being part of the show. Please contact Erin on social media before she blocks you on all of them. Thanks again to Cool
Except
Stuff.
for one. It's a fun little game.
Right. All but one. That's the key. Thanks again to CoolStuffInc.com for sponsoring this giveaway. And stay tuned for our top 10 list this week. And maybe you can win next week's free gift certificate, because it is time to talk about Time Spiral Remastered. The word has trickled out. This is a sold out product. This is a absolutely home run. God help us all if they ever put anything else in old borders. Putting any card in an old border is now insta money, and Wizards now knows this.
Good.
For good or for bad, honestly. Mm-hmm. But they now know that if they literally put any card in the old border for any reason, promo, bonus sheet, whatever, it's going to go gangbusters, and we're going to go nuts over it, and the foils are going to be stupid, because the foils at this point are basically expeditions. As far as they are as rare as an expedition. 1 in 91 boxes. That's a lot. And
individually, they're all 1 in 91 boxes.
Individually, right. And because they have no collation, they're all the same rarity, essentially. So all the rares, the foil rares of the foil promos or whatever. Boxes,
and there's 121 of the old frame bonus cards. So you're expected to get 1 1/4 per box. Total.
Yeah, I read, I want to say 1.7 or something, but
that's again, as rare as Urza's Legacy foils. That's pretty rare.
It's extremely rare. So with, it being very popular, and it's got all that nostalgia wrapped in it, and people love nostalgia and whatnot, and the fact that they're not making anymore, they said they're not making anymore, oops, it's all gone, good luck finding all those old, promo foils, and we have a killer product. Yeah. So let's get started here with our number 10. Ruben, what's number 10?
I have a single higher on my list, and it's my number 10.
Uno higher. All right, Aaron, what's your number 10?
So my 10 that are on my list are all cards that have the old border frame. These are all cards that see vintage or legacy play, because that's my bread and butter. And I was one of those people that had been saying that for quite some time, that there is an audience out there, particularly in the older formats, that will never give Wizards a dime as long as the card comes in a new frame. But if you put that old frame on there, that is a game changer. And it's nice to see that I was right, and it's nice to see that Wizards clued into that. And I look forward to seeing, them do more cards like this, because that audience in particular woke up. People who don't normally pay attention to spoiler season were glued to that Twitter feed to see, what cards were going to come up. And this was a card that I was very excited to get my hands on. This is a key piece of vintage dredge. It also sees play in modern dredge as well. This was also the return of the little tombstone on top. This was something they used to do in the corner of the card to show that it was something that could see play from the graveyard. And it had that really beautiful old gold frame, which I love, with a little bit of stank on it. My number 10 is Prized Amalgam.
Yeah.
So Prized Amalgam is one colorless, a blue and a black. It's a creature zombie, 3 power and 3 toughness, printed before this only once in Shadows over Innistrad. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it, we're not casting this. Return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So obviously this plays very well with other creatures you're playing, such as Icarid and Narcomoeba, or if you're playing with Silver Smoke Ghoul, that's another thing you can get some use out of with this. But just a really great way to go wide very, very quickly and very easily. It's blue and black, so it pitches to Unmask, Force of Will, and Force of Negation if you're running any of those cards. Really great art here. But for me, it was the old frame and that tombstone. It was just like, oh.
Yep. The tombstone is such a chef's kiss for this.
We're all aware of sort of how 90s the design is, but it doesn't make us love it
it's
any
cool
less.
Again.
We
were talking about the original MTGO layout where you would walk up to tables like you were in RuneScape. And that was not cool in 2010, but we're in 2021 now. It's retro now.
Right.
Like we're to the point where it's so old that it's cool again.
Jeez. Well, let me tell you, so old that it's cool again is definitely for my number 10. It's always been cool for me, but it's got a new frame, new old frame, as it were, on it. My list doesn't consist entirely of old frame cards, but a whole bunch of it is old frame stuff. That said, I can't not show love for this card. This is a card that if I had a cube to this day and still had it up and running, and this guy was in it from the moment I made it to the moment I got rid of it many years ago at this point, I certainly would go all in on an old border foil Ninja of the Deep Hours. It's just a gorgeous card. Absolutely fantastic. And a fantastic card by itself. It's a blue and 3 generic mana for a 2/2. This is back when they made 4 mana 2/2s. They don't make those anymore.
Well,
this is
like
Tell us more, Grandpa.
This is a 2
know,
mana
right?
2/2.
It is a 2 mana, as it should be. It's a creature human ninja. It has ninjutsu for a blue and a generic mana, which is blue and a generic mana. Return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand. Put this card onto the battlefield from your hand tapped and attacking. And whenever Ninja of the Deep Hours deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card.
I love ninjutsu as an ability, and they've brought it back without calling it ninjutsu, like they've done with a couple of other abilities a couple of times. The most recent example being the unblocked rogue legend, who's like named like Zagoth or something.
Right.
I mean, and some arts just look like they belong in the old frame, and I feel like Ninja of the Deep Hours really looks like it belongs in that old frame.
They've also expanded ninjutsu with Yuriko, who was on my list last week, by giving Commander ninjutsu, which, if you thought ninjutsu was good now, imagine using that as a way to get out of the command zone. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah. That's dope. I really like that a lot. So Ninja is sweet. Let's move on here to our number 9, where Ruben has one. What you got?
I do. And Erin talked about her top 10 list from last week. I'm going to talk about my top 10 list for next week, which is going to be the Greg Staples arts. Yeah. Because my number 9 has new art never before seen by Greg Staples, replacing a art that has been on Search for Tomorrow since the beginning and been reprinted half a dozen times. But I do absolutely love this new Search for Tomorrow art by Greg Staples. 2 colorless and a green, suspend 2, which means that rather than cast the card from your hand, you may pay a green and exile it with 2 time counters on it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you remove a time counter, and when the last one is removed, you cast it without paying its mana cost. And its effect is search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library.
Yep, this card was sweet. Note it puts the land into play untapped, which is sometimes matters.
Very important.
Definitely when it comes off suspend, it matters.
Yeah, I love this art here. You know, you can clearly see the person coming from one setting to another, and those settings appear to be very different, where one appears to be very gray, cave-like almost, to this beautiful jungle land with fruits and flowers and waterfalls and sunlight. And, you know, this card has been important in Modern for some time. It used to be all the Scape Shift decks used to like this card, and still do. In fact, the Titan Shifts, even when they moved away from Scape Shift, you still just wanted to ramp into prime time, and this was a really great way that you could do that. And so, I think this card will always have a home in Modern, and especially when they keep giving us dumb things to do with lands like Field of the Dead, and you know, as long as that's a strategy that people want to be playing, they're going to be playing Search for Tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean the ability to, you know, and it's better than Rampant Growth because again, it comes into play untapped. So turn one, this is what you want to do on turn one for sure, and it gains you from 2 to 4 just like that. Yep. And this card, and now it looks amazing. I'm guessing this is from Eldraine, what have you, in terms of the world it's from.
Maybe. It's got some jungly elements. It could be Zendikar. It could be, I mean, who knows? It doesn't. Yeah. It could be anywhere.
But it's beautiful regardless.
It is very nice.
And affordable, 30 cents now. Like, I'm a big fan of budget EDH, and a lot of staples are going up, and this is still quite affordable. Get it while you can.
There you go. Aaron, what's your number 9?
So my number 9, you know, if I bring up number 10, I got to go into number 9. This was another card that we were really excited to get for the Dredge decks. This is a, you know, Golgari Grave Troll's banned in Modern and restricted in Vintage. So after Grave Troll, this is the next best Dredger you can be running. So he's playing Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. So it's exactly where you want to be. The little tombstone just did it for me, and this was just beautiful. My number 9, Stinkweed Imp. Stinkweed Imp is 2 colorless and a black. It's a creature imp, 1 power and 2 toughness with flying. Whenever Stinkweed Imp deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature, which is effectively Death Touch, and does matter. This is a card that we do end up casting quite a bit, actually. And it does have Dredge 5, so it is the second most powerful Dredger, and the one that sees the most play across all formats. And so the minute I saw this in that old frame with like the bubbling, you know, that black metal frame, like,
it does irk me in a weird way when it's like clearly a mechanic that you could just say it's a mechanic.
This one is different because it is combat damage, right? As opposed to all damage. So you can't replace Stinkweed Imp. There are others that are similar with lifelink, that say specifically when it deals combat damage, gain that much life.
Right, like Into the Field, stuff like that, which I'm totally okay with existing for that. And you put on, there was a good point, it's not the exact mechanics, so that's cool, but this version looks amazing.
It does.
Like,
and again,
Ham's art is incredible here.
Yeah, I was going to say, I prefer the Ed Beard Jr. art on Stinkweed Imp, but honestly, the Nils Ham art works better with the old frame.
It looks really, really nice. All right, let's move on here to my number 9. Speaking of one that looks really, really nice, partly it's just like this one hits so hard. I was like, I had to put it on here somewhere. I can't. I mean, you can't look at a Ravnica era spell in the old gold border frame, and I feel just not have the heart swell. I'm waiting on the thing to come up here on my webpage. But my number 9 is Abrupt Decay.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to have to do from memory now because it's not pulling up. Here we go. It's a green and a black mana. It's a red mana. It's a green and a black mana for an instant rare originally from Return to Ravnica. It can't be countered by spells or abilities, and it destroys target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less at instant speed. So
yeah.
That's what it
does. Go ahead.
I was just saying, you know, this card from the moment it came out had that little dog whistle there of CMC 3 or less, which is usually, it tends to mean that it's really good in the older formats, because in older formats, you're not really casting many cards that cost more than 3. And so older formats also tend to live and die by their blue cards. You have Force of Will, you have Force of Negation, you have Flusterstorm, which wasn't in Modern until recently. And so there were so many ways to deal with removal before, and having this be just unconditional anything but a land removal is incredible. And so this was clearly whoever's job it was to identify what cards see play in older formats really did a bang up job, because, you know, they really nailed so many cards in both Legacy and Vintage and even Modern to some extent, where they clearly knew who their audience was. And I mean, this sees play in every format.
There were so few misses in Time Spiral Remastered. I'm used to like a dozen cards being misses. There were maybe 3 that were like, why is this card here? And the only downside to Abrupt Decay is that we didn't get the phrase mana value yet. We're so close. We're almost there with Strixhaven. If we could have gotten destroy target permanent, non-land permanent with mana value.
See, I wanted the opposite. I think if we're going to use an old frame, I want like the alpha wording where it's like, if thine opponent maintains a permanent, like really,
bury it without the chance of regeneration.
Yeah. I like that.
Use counters, stuff like that.
Damage cannot be prevented to prevent this loss of life or something.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and the way this pops in the old frame is just absolutely incredible, and I love it. So let's move on here to number 8. Ruben, what you got?
My boy. Look what they massacred. My boy. My number 8 is Simian Spirit Guide.
Oh.
I am so sad that I will never be able to use this delightful new Lucas Graziano art in a modern tournament. Because it's gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. Pretty. And so Simian Spirit Guide's 2 colorless and a red for a 2/2 Ape Spirit, originally a common in Planar Chaos, reprinted as an uncommon in M25, back to being a common here in Time Spiral Remastered.
That's what threw me up. Someone's like, it was a common. I'm like, no, it wasn't. It was an uncommon.
No, it wasn't Pauper because they played it in One Land Spy. Yeah.
Exile Simian Spirit Guide from your hand, add a red mana. Of course, this is the planar shifted version of Elvish Spirit Guide. A $3 common from Planar Chaos, y'all. You can get yours for about 50 cents. 50-cent common. That's nothing to sneeze at.
The art on this is particularly timely considering the recent ban. Some people compared this to Avengers of I Don't Feel So Good, and it's sort of going away, and it's like, no!
Oh, that one. Ouch. Because it totally looks like it now that you look at it that way. Yeah. I mean, this is a card that's not doing anything fair. Like, Wizards... Yeah, they love to play with the, we're going to make it a little bit cheaper. We're going to give you a bit of a resource. We're going to let you just kind of extend a little too much. And almost every time it burns them. Almost every time. Just like it's burning his back off right there.
He's turning into birds.
Turning into birds.
Having 8 spirit guides in Belcher is, that's a problem.
When I get real mad, I won't say I'm turning into birds. So,
that's right. I'm turning into birds.
Oh, Dad's turning into birds again.
Oh, darn it. I don't feel so good.
Anyway, that card is sweet. Aaron, what's number 8?
So my number 8 is a card that sees play and soared all the way to the top of Vintage. I believe it sees a little bit of Legacy play and even Modern play as well. But when I think of this card, this is one of those cards that anytime you see an artifact, you immediately think of shops because Mishra's Workshop, you're able to tap and make 3 mana. So this is something that could be slammed on turn 1. This also deals nicely with a lot of the answers in the format in a way that Phyrexian Revoker really doesn't. My number 8 is Sorcerous Spyglass. So Sorcerous Spyglass is 2 colorless and artifact originally printed in Ixalan. As Sorcerous Spyglass enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand and then choose any card name. So you get to look at their hand. Normally, when you have cards like this, you run the risk of whiffing. When you play Revoker or even playing Cabal Therapy, you gotta blind that. There's no way to know ahead of time. Now you know! And then activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. This can name lands. Like Bazaar of Baghdad, you can slam this and they're out. You can choose Library of Alexandria. You can choose, things that you really couldn't choose before with this. And so this is a very powerful card that can be slammed on turn 1. You also get to look at their hand, which is valuable. You can also name fetch lands. Like if you see that they've got a hand that's really riding on cracking that fetch land, they can't do that anymore. And so there are so many next level plays that you can have with this card. Sometimes getting the free information is worth it, even if you don't really find anything worth naming. The card just pays for itself and it's just so good.
Yeah, this was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to look up exactly when it was released. This was after Kaladesh. Yes, it was Kaladesh, and then it was Amonkhet, and then it was Ixalan. And I recall, we were just begging for a pithing needle to stop Aetherworks Marvel. Just begging. And we finally got it. But at that point, it's like, okay, sorry, you've kind of ruined your own format at this point. Right. But wow, that looks amazing in the old format, in the old border.
The old artifacts, the brown borders. Yeah. I mean, I just love the old artifacts the most. And also banned in Brawl, because you can have a Planeswalker as your commander, and this shuts down any old Planeswalker you want.
Yep, any old Planeswalker you got. Well, for my next choice here, this is definitely the one from one of the old borders that I loved the most when it was being revealed. This is also one of my favorite cards of all time. This is also one of the cards that I love because it was a sleeper and no one really respected it except the Japanese pros who were like, you don't understand how powerful Remand is, but we're going to show you. And just like ran all over that Pro Tour with a 2-mana counter spell that only needs 1 blue mana. This thing is not even remotely fair. It will teach you about tempo better than any card I can possibly show you. Yep. Remand is a blue and generic mana for an instant that says counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of that player's graveyard and draw a card. It's just...
The tempoist tempo card. If you need to teach tempo, this is the card to show. Mm-hmm. This card is, I mean, what can you say about Remand other than it ran multiple formats as the go-to turn 2 play in Dragonstorm, in sort of what used to be Delver, or what used to be Canadian Threshold before it became Delver. Remand is spectacular. And my most vivid memory... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
My most vivid memory of Remand was having trouble finding them when I was in college. I could not get a playset together. I couldn't figure out how to get them. They were like $5 in standard. That's the first time I'd ever seen an uncommon like that.
Yeah. This was one of the first ones that just blew up. Like, huge.
My first experience with Remand was when I first started playing Modern. My first Modern deck was Living End. And so there was just that awkward feeling of you cascade, you whoop, 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 Remand. And then you're stuck holding on to a Living End that you can't. It's so awkward, and you're just like, well. And this card, there were times you can go back and look at my Twitter feed of the hundreds of thousands of tweets I posted, and I'm sure if you look up me and Remand, at one point I called for Remand to be banned. Like I was over it. This was obnoxious, and just a very frustrating card.
There are a couple of interesting scenarios with Remand, things like cascading into stuff. Flashed back spells actually don't go back to your hand. Mm-hmm. So there are some really interesting corner cases in addition to just traditionally tempoing the heck out of your opponent.
Right. So let's say you love Remand, right? You're like, I'm all about that Remand life. You're like, I'm going to get a nice, cool, pimply version of Remand, or a pimp or whatever. Pimply? And you say, not pimply, but either way, you say, look, I'm going to go back to Ravnica, the OG 2005. A 2005 foil version is about $21, whereas Time Spiral foil is $60.
Yeah. That old border, man. People love those old borders.
That old border, let me tell you. All right, let's move here to number 7. Ruben, what you got?
I have it's tinfoil hat time. Everybody.
Oh boy.
So here's what's happening. We're going to put on our tinfoil hats. We're going to connect the red yarn, and we're going to...
I don't know if I can get a hat over my bun. It's pretty big.
That's fair. We might need an extra roll of tinfoil for you.
Or a hole, so I can slide it over the bun.
Here's the tinfoil. All right. So Wizards put a cycle of lands in this set that see play of various kinds, right? We have Bojuka Bog, we have Mystic Sanctuary. They put one of each of that were originally parts of other cycles together, and the white one that they gave us is Ancient Den. Mm-hmm. And Ancient Den, first of all, the old border frame, I love it. It is a tap out of white mana, and it's an artifact to land. It is currently banned in Modern. I think it's time to free the den, everybody. We bring back just one of the artifact lands. Let us have one. See what happens.
Right. See what happens.
You know, Aaron, you and I are both on team make Affinity good, right?
We are.
If Affinity's good, then the format's fun. And so I think adding one artifact, and again, people aren't running Disciple of the Vault. Like, we aren't doing crazy things with all of the, now people are obsessed with like hardened scales and a bunch of random crap like that. This isn't really gonna change that much, will it?
We're not
trying to... Now, when you mentioned tinfoils, I was like, does that mean they're testing if they can ban Bojuka Bog? Like,
oh, well, probably.
We went in a whole other direction.
I don't know. Ancient Den, the whole artifact land sort of saga it's kind of mind blowing. When you look back on it, you say you're going to have a mechanic that's based on the permanence of one type, and you're going to give the free permanents that are very hard to interact with a whole cycle of that thing that makes them cheaper. Okay, that was a thing that happened. Magic. Aaron, what's number 7?
So my number 7 is, I think, the last stretch card on my list. I'm getting this out of my system right now. But this also was a card that rocketed straight to the top of Vintage. It saw a little bit of play in Modern for a while. We did have these sort of Vengevine decks. We did have this sort of hollow one. Whoops, I just kind of put up. It's hollow one.
Oops.
right.
Following it.
But it saw a little bit of play in Modern, and it hasn't really seen much play ever since they got rid of the Goblin Lore Hollow one. You know, it's not really a deck anymore, but it was for a while, but it still has a home in Vintage, where it has completely changed the game. Hollow one is 5 colorless, was printed in Hour of Devastation. It's a creature golem, 4 power, 4 toughness. This spell costs 2 colorless less to cast for each card you've cycled or discarded this turn. And you can also pay 2 colorless to cycle it. So, if you pair this with Bazaar of Baghdad, it's free!
And you effectively get around Graveyard Hate.
And there are so many screenshots floating around where somebody will confidently slam a Leyline of the Void, have a garbage hand, and then you lose to 2 hollow ones. And, it's just a great card. It also reinvigorated Hollow Vine. People have been looking for ways to do things with Venge Vines in Vintage for a while, and you had another way to do that. And so we now have, Old School Dredge. We also have Hollow Vine. We have Hogak Vine. And this card really made all of that possible. This is the card that people really want to restrict now. They're like, whenever they get too frustrated with Dredge, they're like, restrict Hollow One, because your cards just don't matter to a certain point. Like, nice cage, idiot.
And that's great. I love that. Right? There should be a sort of vector that you're able to take your weird deck that's already on a weird vector to another direction. It's like, this is how I'll punish you. Fine, whatever.
I think that Hollow One adds a dimension to Vintage Dredge that it didn't previously have.
Yeah.
I think that it is an effect that is, obviously, it's a cost reduction effect, so it's inherently unfair, but it's a 4/4 without haste. It's an artifact, and it's an artifact creature, so there's a lot of ways to answer it if you want to. Yeah. I don't think it's an unfair card by any means. On the vectors, as we were saying the word vector, I decided to use it, of other cards that have been banned, like Lodestone Golem, right? Yeah. Like, it's not that kind of artifact.
But just the minute I saw that old frame, though, and the way the old frame goes so nicely with the background of, like, that dusty, ashen, barren landscape, it's just the perfect combination.
My number 7 here has been printed 20 times, 20 different unique print.
And how much is it?
It's still worth $3 plus, no matter which version you're looking for, no matter where you're going to find it. Very controversial card, which when it was first debuted, and I was talking to R&D a lot back then, and I'm just like, why? And they're just like, well, it was good, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know it's good, man, but we have to live with Path to Exile forever? We got to live with this forever, right? Path to Exile is 1 white mana for an instant that says, exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle their library. So what this has done to Modern, it's Swords to Plowshares in Modern. Like, you can't, I think you just can't look at it any other way.
I think that it's added something good to Modern, ultimately, though. I think that Path to Exile is a force for good in Modern. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's a good white card, right?
That's nice, yeah.
How many of those do we have?
Seriously.
Second of all, it is having a stopgap to those super... like Neoform, for example. Path to Exile, it gives decks ways to answer that you might not otherwise. It gives you an excuse to play Abzan as opposed to Jund. It puts a whole different kind of spin on a metagame, and I really appreciate it.
It lets Burn deal with Wormcoil Engine, as I saw yesterday. I was watching a young man stream, and he really just needed his paths. And, it is the removal that a lot of removal is judged by. You look at Black, and Black has Fatal Push, and for a while there, it was like, oh, is this the Black version of Path to Exile? Dismember. Is this the Black version of Path to Exile? And so, whenever we look at removal, Murderous Cut's another one. This is the standard. These are the shoes that removal has to fill. And in Legacy and Vintage, you obviously have Swords to Plowshares, but if you need Swords 5 and 6, you can certainly do a lot worse than Path to Exile.
If you're going to do it, just undo the pin, throw the freaking thing in Standard, give us Path to Exile back, give us this thing in Historic at the least.
It does, yeah. Historic could definitely use it.
Seriously, Historic could love this card.
And basic land encouragement is always something I'm in favor of, because as new players, I talk with a lot of new players, a lot of casual players in my friend groups, and they're like, man, I wish mana bases didn't cost so much. So anything, because it's boring to a new player. I want to cast my spells. I don't want to spend $1 billion to be able to cast my spells, is the general idea.
Right. And so encouraging play the stuff.
And this is a way to encourage even more competitive players to at least play a little bit more basic.
Right. We're getting to the point where, I saw what you did there, but we're getting a little bit of the point where, there's just no downside whatsoever to playing all non-basic lands in Historic or even the older formats if they don't have Path to Exile in them.
Right.
So that's where you're able to see. We'll see if they
Fighting
print
the
it.
good fight alongside Veteran Explorer is Path to Exile.
Nice.
And Prismatic Vista, to be fair.
Well, same with Assassin's Trophy. I mean, like,
Sure.
Assassin's Trophy in Vintage is largely just a strip mine. Like,
Wow. That's pretty brutal. Let's move here to number 6. Aaron, what you got?
my number 6 was number 1 on my list last week for multicolored humans. This was a card that I felt had made a tremendous impact on some of the oldest formats in the shortest amount of time. The card's been out for 2 years, give or take, and had a seismic impact on Vintage. Literally every deck in the format was impacted by this. It's seen play in Legacy as well, not really so much in Modern. I apologize in advance. It is a beautiful day out, and there's a lot of people showing off their cars. So just, it adds to the ambiance, I promise you. My number 6 is Lavinia Azorius Renegade. So Lavinia is 1 white and 1 blue. She was printed in Ravnica Allegiance, legendary creature, human soldier, 2 power, 2 toughness. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. So in formats like Vintage that live and die off their Moxen, this is a game changer because very rarely do you ever have enough lands to cast your Paradoxical Outcome or to cast your Force of Will. You're probably using your Moxen to get there, and you can't do that anymore. And also, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, you counter that spell. So you're countering the Moxen, and it is possible to get a turn 1 Lavinia. And there are so many games that a really early Lavinia can just shut the opponent down completely. And, you know, there is no deck in Vintage that was not affected by this. Hollow One, Hogak, the Moxen, Workshops, Oath. I mean, everything was affected by this card. And
Force of Will.
Force of Will. And so when whoever was designing this set had to identify the cards, I'm really glad that they picked this card because this is exactly for those older players that, you know, really want this effect on them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this
Hate
is
Bear.
the
That's what this is.
hatiest of
Asymmetrical,
hate
no
bears.
less. Normally,
Yeah,
it used to be you both suffered, and now it's literally just you.
Just the opponent.
Card's
Thanks.
insane.
I get to play all my stuff and I get to pitch this to Force of Will just for the extra digs, you know?
Yep.
It's like,
Right.
no, I'll force that. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't love the old gold border cards, but this one fits super nicely. I like this one a lot.
I'm having the same issue that Aaron is having, is that it's a wonderful day outside. I
Yeah.
have the windows open.
Pump
and
your brakes,
Orlando
kids.
It's loud. Okay. Ruben, what's number 6?
My number 6 is I just love the little tiny tombstone. And I wanted to pick a card that I knew Aaron wouldn't pick. And I wanted to pick a card that Evan wouldn't pick. And I know that Aaron was going to pick mostly things that go in decks.
Oh.
And I knew that Evan doesn't like Storm and Walmart. So my number 6 is Past and Flames.
Oh my God.
Yes!
Speaking of art that fits the old border, I mean, I
Yeah.
just feel like this could have come out in Apocalypse, and I would have been like,
Wouldn't blink an eye.
this
Yep.
exists. 3 colorless and a red for a sorcery. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback till the end of the turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and it itself has flashback of 4 colorless and a red.
So good.
I
Easily-
love that the tiny tombstone is so adorable, and I love it so much.
I mean,
and
yeah.
It's
I just
pretty
want
incredible.
This is
it
basically
forever.
Yogg-Will. I mean, this is a safe version of Yogg-Will for Modern and Legacy. If you're playing Storm, this is where you want to be. I mean, it's just a huge, huge game changer.
This is just one of those cards. I couldn't believe they made it. You know, I was just like,
And then
What-
Underworld
what?
Breach came out.
oh, Underworld Breach broke me.
They
Just
gave
like
us
snapped
more.
me in half as a Magic player. I'm like, what? Why are we doing this? What are we doing? And you gave this thing flashback. Why? I don't know. It's already busted as it is. You didn't need to make it better, but it is. Okay. That's where we're at. Okay. And it does look great in the frame though, for real.
does,
This is
yeah.
like right out of old school art. It looks fantastic. Let's move on here to my number 6. My number 6 is so simple. Like this was, you know, sometimes there's just absolute true beauty and simplicity. You know, just good old fashioned. Show me the artwork. Show me a tap symbol. Add a wing ding. That's it. That's what you need for wastes. And the waste in the old frame is amazing. Absolutely incredible. $40 foil.
Yep.
But still, you can't
It's the only basic in the set.
Yes, the only basic is I love it. You just can't. It just looks so good. It fits so perfectly. It's just, like this is the type of stuff that just you can't get enough of as a Magic player. It works on so many levels.
This was my number 10. I
Nice.
completely agree. I can't say enough good things about the empty text box,
It's just-
tap, add wingding, using the art. I mean, it's just perfect. It's so smart. It's
They're going to
just
pick
like-
one basic land. By God, they crushed it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good
it's a
job.
shame that, I mean, perhaps my memory is wrong, but I don't remember that my memories of that standard are really just of the fact of like the 4-color standard decks where you had like Moist Jund, Jeskai Black, and I don't recall
Dark
the
Jeskai.
wastes actually making much of an impact. Like I think we were all just playing every color.
It broke Modern, right?
Okay.
It did break Modern,
Yeah, it broke
and
Waste-
was
well, we
much
were
more popular in Legacy.
Well, we were playing, but they have Ancient Tomb and City of Traders and Eldrazi Temple. Like, are we playing wastes?
They
Like,
still
couldn't
needed a waste
do it?
to be able
Okay.
to, because there were, well, you have Path to Exile, right? And so you still want to get your Wingding going.
And your Wingding
They had a
smart.
lot of, they had a couple things that had search your library for a basic of some kind, or
Okay,
they
I must
wanted to
have
be
just not remembered
wasteland
it.
proof.
Okay.
There were a couple of them in there.
Okay.
And you can only run 4 Ancient Tombs. You can only run so many.
Yeah, I just don't recall it ever. I just don't recall seeing enough of them in the wild, I guess.
It's true. This is also really popular in Commander, and you need a bunch of them. So
Wow, this is TCG Player totally changed their deck database that used to be linked from Scryfall, and it is now unusable at finding old weird Pro Tour decks, because I was like, let me go find the old weird standard decks from that time, and I can't find it anymore because they changed everything. That sucks. Because the card was weird. Like, this was, you were in the 4-color days because they gave us fetch lands, which was real dumb.
Right.
With dual, with shocks and stuff, along with Gideon, which was just
One of the
so
most
ridiculously
expensive standards ever.
Oh god, it was brutal. So yeah, that was not a comfortable time in Magic.
But I did like Esper Dragons a lot, so.
There's nothing wrong with that. Moving here to number 5. Aaron, what you got?
Number 5, we talked a little bit earlier about Simian Spirit Guide and how awkward it was that this really great card got new art and got reprinted shortly after it had been banned. And my number 5 suffers from the same problem. This is a card that also got banned, and also happened to get a really great old border treatment, which made it a little bit awkward, but it is still a pillar of vintage. It's doing a lot of work there, and people are trying to make it a thing in Modern. My number 5 is Dreadhorde Arcanist. So Dreadhorde Arcanist is 1 colorless and a red. It was printed in War of the Spark, 1 power, 3 toughness. Why? Why does this have 3 toughness? Why is the butt so big? I don't understand. It also has trample.
sure.
And then whenever Dreadhorde Arcanist attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost less than or equal to Dreadhorde Arcanist's power from your graveyard without paying its mana cost.
So free?
If that card will be put into your graveyard this turn,
free?
you exile it instead. So you build your, swords, path, brainstorm, ponder, recall, free. Surgical extraction. You are not paying for this. Like, do you realize how easy it is for this card to run away with the game and how easy it is for your opponent to bury you in card advantage? There are people in Vintage right now that are pairing this with Showdown of the Scalds because you've cast a bunch of cheap spells. Your Dreadhorde Arcanist gets bigger.
Yep.
And then that power is bigger, so you can
Casting your
flashback
dig
bigger
through
things.
times and your time walks.
Why,
why
does
not?
it have trample? Why?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. It
And
makes
so,
why?
So when people saw this, they were like, "Oh, it's banned in Legacy now," and it's like, "Oh, people are still gonna want this. I promise you."
I will
Still $50
forever-
foil for this old border.
Yeah. I will forever be upset that red decks pay for the sins of blue-green decks. And this is, we've always been like, well, what's the red Snapcaster Mage? What's the red Tarmogoyf? And it turns out it's been Dreadhorde Arcanist the whole time,
Yeah.
apparently.
Card is stupid.
And then it gest banned first. And it's like, come on, let red justice for Ferocidon is what I'm trying to say.
There definitely needs to be justice for Ferocidon. That was awful.
This was another one of those cards that just had that dog whistle of like 1 or less, and then the little sirens went off of it, and it took a while. Like it was something that really wasn't dominant for I think about a year went by before it really just became ubiquitous, and you couldn't get out of it, and it was just the best thing you could be doing. And now in Vintage, it's in the Xerox decks, it's in the Breach decks for when they need to play a fair deck. It's just everywhere you want to be.
This also pairs really hilariously well with Become Immense, because you can become immense and then attack and then cast the same become immense, which is adorable.
I don't know anybody who's done that, but I like the sound of it.
I don't either, but it sounds
If you're
great.
watching this and you've done that, leave a comment and tell us.
You live that dream. Let us know. That would be amazing. This card is just so busted. Actually, right now, as we are recording this, you can go back and draft War of the Spark on Magic Arena. And I went back and did so. And my God, God, that format is the most overpowered mess we have ever drafted. I mean, ever. I think it's not even close.
Just pure gas, huh?
The most overpowered draft environment. I swear to God, it's just a cube. The whole damn set is just a cube, and you just draft in cube. And
every deck has 5 planeswalkers in it.
Every deck has planeswalkers. Every deck has insane removal. Like, every deck has insane threats. It's whoever sticks the last threat wins. Jesus Christ, that set was ridiculous. And this is a good example of the ridiculousness. Like, it was over the top and then some. Ruben, what's number 5?
My number 5 is another card that just like speaks to my heart because it needs love because it's so sad. Because it's the sad robot.
Oh.
And they brought back the original art for Solemn Simulacrum. And it makes my heart happy.
Yeah.
4 colorless for a 2/2. This art is by Greg Staples. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. When it dies, you may draw a card. This card actually did not see a ton of play when it was first printed because it was printed in Mirrodin. And Mirrodin happened. And it saw some play.
Didn't they play Tooth and Nail?
It did, but Tooth and Nail wasn't as good as pretty much everything else you could be doing at the time. It really came into its own when it came into Standard with like Primeval Titan, and you would do the 2/4/6 ramp. Kessig Wolf Run decks loved it, and luckily it's seen some more printings. It's currently in Standard, so I just love me a sad robot.
I could be wrong, but I think this is the first time an Invitational card has been reprinted with the Invitationalist on it.
Interesting.
I'm not 100% on that, but like Wizards has definitely got into a kick even for like a decade or so of just like
maybe
starting with Meddling Mage. They're like, we're not reprinting the old faces or whatever anymore. And we're like, why? And then Skrillex showed up on Dark Confidant and we're like, what is happening? And you bring us back to here and I'm like, yes, this is fantastic. Let's do more of this.
Sweet. Yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head.
For my number 5, and feel free in the comments below to let us know if I'm wrong.
That's right.
But I think that's the first one. For my number 5, this is, to me, it just amuses me so much that it's so weird, and that when you think back to the old school Magic and the old Border of Magic and how they would have no really good idea of how to explain to you what an enchantment creature is other than just slapping it right there on the type line with Courser of Krufix.
Yeah.
Courser of Krufix looks absolutely ridiculous in this new frame, or this old frame rather. It's 2 green and generic mana for a 2/4. This is an enchantment creature Centaur. You play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play lands from the top of your library. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Born of the Gods was a trash set with trash cards, and most of it was absolutely terrible except Courser Krufix, which was a staple in Standard.
Yeah, this was an interesting card because we were coming off of Thragtusk Standard, and Thragtusk was a format-defining card that was something that people really had to wean themselves off of. And we're so used to having just this card that you can put in any deck and acts as a really great, way to like just kind of come back in the mid game. You could take your licks in the early game, and this was the card that would help you go to the late game. And we got really spoiled. And when rotation happened, people were like, oh my God, what are we going to do without Thragtusk? And then we got Courser of Krufix. And Courser became the new Thragtusk. If you could just get to turn 3, and if you could or even turn 4, if you wanted to make sure you got value out of it, you'd wait till 4, play the Courser, play the land. And then this was the game that would, again, you could take your licks. It also had a really good butt on it, so where you could block and small blockers. It could be defensive, but again, it could also make sure that you got to see the late game. And so, and then after that, we got Siege Rhino. And so they did a really good job for a while there of always giving us something to fulfill that role of like the green mid-range, but that'll just help you survive. Yeah.
They also got into this like pattern where they used to give LSV the best card in Standard for the preview of that set. Like no matter what it was, it's like he gets the best one, and it's like, oh, this must be the best thing you can do. And turns out it was, because little else was good in that set.
Super good value. I mean, I always, whenever I see a 2/4 for 3 mana, and it has like a bunch of rules text, I always sit up and take notice, because a lot of the time 3 damage or -3/-3 will be the line of where damage is, or you'll need to block an important 3/2 or 3/3 in the format. And this one passes that test, being able to come down early, generating a little bit of value on just gaining a little tiny bit of life, just playing a couple of cards off the top of your deck, which is effectively drawing a card. Now, it just snowballs from there.
Oh yeah, I mean the card advantage was absolutely ridiculous. You had these days, the most expensive card in the set is Mogus, God of Slaughter, along with Brimaz and Phoenix, God of Deception, and
Poor
Xenagos, God of Rebels,
Brimaz.
and Afara, God of Polis. Fantastic. And it also has a $3 Planeswalker in this set. That's what you got, is your $3 Kiora the Crashing Wave, which was absolutely terrible. And Corsair Kruvix is right above it. And yeah, that whole set was just... Ugh,
it was a mess.
Not good. Let's go on here to number 4. Aaron, what you got?
So my number 4 is another card that is really just maybe for one format. Like, I think they tried to make this card a thing in Modern, and it didn't really take, and I don't think it ever did anything in Legacy, really. But for the vintage kids, this one's for you. My number 4 is Paradoxical Outcome. Paradoxical Outcome is 3 colorless and a blue. It's printed in Kaladesh. It's an instant. Return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents you control to their owner's hands, and you draw a card for each card returned to you this way. So... Moxen, Soul Ring, Mox Opal, whoop, pick them up, put them down. This is what Paradoxical Outcome is all about. And so, I will never forget Reed Duke, I believe, was the one that really just kind of, this card came out, it flew under the radar for a little while, and I think it might have been either Eternal Weekend or some other big tournament where, I'll never forget Reed was on camera and Randy Bueller's mind was just blown, and he was like, Paradoxical Outcome was the card, and he was using in Storm of all things, because that was your Storm count of whoop, 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 that, whoop, 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 and then Tendrils, game over. And so Paradoxical Outcome Storm, Paradoxical Oath is a thing. There are so many ways that you can use Paradoxical Outcome, and there have been calls for it to be restricted as well, because it is an interesting card, because the way that Outcome decks are typically built, they really only won like one win condition, but it's a lot like Sphinx's Revelation, where if they even get one off, you've basically lost the game. Like, you don't know it yet, but once they get like the one off and the two off, just pack it up. Like, it's gonna take them a while to find the one win con, but they're gonna find it, and you're just not going to come back from it.
We're able to pick up free mana sources with a spell that draws you a card for every free mana source you just picked up off the table. So,
Outcome is the engine and the gas all in one. All it's missing is the actual winning the game, because it lets you reset all of those artifacts, like you just mentioned, and it also adds to your storm count, and it also draws cards. So it does all of the things. It takes quite a bit for a 4 mana card that you cast for 4 mana to see play in Vintage, and this one certainly qualifies.
Yeah,
I will say that most of the... I've been really lenient on the wow, this really fits the old border. This one looks weird with the old border. To me, I think this one's a little bit anachronistic with the old border.
It looks a little odd, I feel, in many ways. This one, I think, more than most, you can see the gears turning of Wizards was like, what are the top Vintage cards that do not have an old border?
Yeah. This
one, okay, would be really cool. My number 4 is higher on somebody else's list, but that's okay because it's dope. So, Ruben, what's your number 4?
My number 4, not an old bordered card. They put this one in the new border, which I kind of like, because the only time that this card's been printed in Time Spiral, it did not have the legendary frame that was introduced. And so now we have a legendary frame on this card that also harkens back to, or harkens forward, I suppose, to a new art that we've gotten on Safi Eriksdottir.
Ooh.
Safi Eriksdottir is a green and a white for a 2/2 human scout with sacrifice Safi Eriksdottir. When target creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, return that card to the battlefield. This, of course, harkens forward to Hans Eriksson, who is in the background. Look at him back there. And you can see the art of Hans Eriksson. Safi is in the background of his card.
Yeah, they kind of connected them in a very cute, interesting way. The card itself was part of weird combos that went infinite in weird ways. It took like 4 different creatures, and there was stacking the stuff. It
was crypt champion centric. Yeah, it was a weirdo.
Yeah, that was super weird, but it did a really unique thing. And honestly, I'd like to see more of that type of stuff. I feel like green and or white having more of those kind of just basically clever recursion. You know what I mean? Give us some ways to make those colors do something kind of cool and unique. And clever recursion, I thought, was a really fun way to make this card stand out. And it was super fun to play with, which is great.
Yeah.
So let's move on here to number 3. Aaron, what you got?
This is a card that is restricted in Vintage, which... Think about that. A card that is so powerful, you can only run 1 copy in Vintage. And then you go to other formats like Legacy and Modern, and you realize that you could just play 4. It almost feels unfair. It almost feels too good to be true. And this was a card that was revealed pretty early in the previews, if I remember correctly, and has maintained its value. The old bordered non-foil is $37. I don't want to know what the foil is. My number 3 is Chalice of the Void. So Chalice of the Void is XX, and it was from Mirrodin. It's an artifact. Chalice enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. So if you want it for 0, you can just turn 1. It's fine. You can prevent Moxen. It's a good time. Particularly good against paradoxical outcomes. So you always want to have your chalices if you can. Whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on it, you counter that spell. And so this is a really great card against decks that do run low cost things. Chalice for 1 can be backbreaking against a lot of decks, Delver decks, Hogak decks. That's enough. You don't even really have to go that big. I mean, you can if you're feeling frisky, but a Chalice for 0 or a Chalice for 1 can just be backbreaking. And so the fact that they previewed this very early, again, they knew who that audience was. They knew that there were people out there that were either running one of these in Vintage or they're running 4 of them in Legacy or Modern, and this one's for you.
I mean, this was my number 4, so I'm right there with you. This was absolutely gorgeous in the new frame, an absolutely huge card to reprint in this fashion, essentially. Chalice is great, even back to the old school Vintage decks, to your cubes and whatnot, and it's just a damn powerful card. This was, sort of made before... the only artifact set they'd made before broke everything, and then they kind of accidentally rebroke everything. And when they rebroke everything, this wasn't a part of the breaking.
Correct.
Chalice of the Void was not a standard all-star that everyone just couldn't get enough of. No. It was only the older formats that showed the true power of this card. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, Chalice is the card that I pointed to when a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm picking up a box of Time Spiral Remastered," but he's like a casual only, commander only player. I'm like, well, if you get this, you can get a bunch more casual cards, because this ain't it. This is like the spikiest spike that's ever spiked card.
Yeah, this is not for fun at the kitchen table.
Right.
What do you mean everything's countered?
Right.
What?
I love a Chalice of the Void. It is not what I would call fun.
Not fun times. Ruben, what's number 3?
My number 3 is fun. My number 3 makes me, again, another card that makes my heart happy. And in the original Time Spiral, they had 1 Elder Dragon on the sheet, and it was Nicol Bolas. And in Time Spiral Remastered, they have 1 Elder Dragon on the sheet, and they gave me Arcades the Strategist. It makes me so happy. Arcades the Strategist is a colorless, a green, a white, and a blue for a legendary creature, Elder Dragon. It's a 3/5 with flying and vigilance, originally from Core Set 2019. When a creature with Defender enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Each creature you control with Defender assigns its combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, and can attack as though it didn't have Defender. I have an Arcades the Strategist deck. I don't know if I've mentioned that in the past. I'm sure
You
I
have
several dozens of times.
It's come up every once in a while.
I love Arcades.
The downside.
Arcades.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the downside to Arcades is it basically made Doran obsolete. Where
That's true.
If you want to be doing the butts thing, I mean, this card just does it better. Unfortunately,
This and the Jeskai Legendary Wall are the 2 big decks for that now. Yeah.
They have actually keyworded that damage, dealt by, here it was, Backbone. Backbone is the official MTG Arena specific keyword ability that causes creatures to deal damage based on their toughness. I have no problems with that keyword. Why
it
can't
sounds
the
like
keyword...
street slang where it's like, "Hey girl, you got that backbone."
Hey girl, you got that backbone.
Well, the pre-show can tell you all about the backbone.
Arcades got backbone.
He got lots of backbone. This is a super cool card. I love that they chose it. If this is going to be the 1 Elder Dragon, absolutely fantastic. Just like the 1 basic land.
Yep. I was very close to putting my other commander, which I interestingly also put in this set in the old border, Itali, the Primal Storm. Mm-hmm. Like they just were, they saw me coming. Like they just knew that Ruben Bressler wanted to have this set.
It's a $65 foil, no problem. No big deal.
And people are paying that. I'm telling you.
It's true.
Yeah.
So for my number 3, this is definitely a classic. And it's also one of those things where there certainly felt like there was enough pull at the time, to be like, you know what? You had an incredible image to start with, and then they printed it again, and it was kind of not that incredible of an image. And then they made it a expedition or whatever they called it at the time, a masterpiece version, and it was even weirder. And they decided to use that for Arena. Okay, sure. But when it finally came back to Iconic Masters, they got their heads back on straight, and Alexi Bricklot is the Thoughtseize image there in Double Masters, not the box topper, but is in the old border, and man, it looks amazing. Thoughtseize, if you don't know, is the best discard spell in Magic. It's
$40?
black mana. Mm-hmm.
Non-foil. Oh my god.
Yeah, $40. And the foil is $335 right now as of this recording. Thoughtseize is a black mana for a sorcery that says target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card and you lose 2 life. That's as good as it gets.
It's funny because I was looking at this last night when I was preparing for this list, and I was like, it's basically just the Lorwyn one, right? And so I went back and looked at the Lorwyn one, and really the only difference that I could see is the color of the paper at the bottom, because the Lorwyn one is white, and this is that Tommy beige, but that's really the only difference. But like,
yeah.
And that's $390. So this one's a steal at $335.
Right.
So just jump on that.
You heard it here first.
I mean, the Lorwyn version has black text on a white box as opposed to the white text on the black bubbly background that you get from the old border. I mean, there's nothing quite like an old border.
Yeah, it's very close, I admit, though, but it does look so cool, and like it's a hell of a spell, and I'll take it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on here to number 2. My number 2 is somebody's number 1, so that's very exciting. Ruben, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is the best card in the Magic the Gathering online cube. You heard it here first, kids. It's the best card in the cube. It is one of the best 1-drops of all time, if not the best 1-drop of all time.
Oh, okay.
And it is one of my favorite cards of all time, and it might be the only good white card that exists. My number 2 is Thraben Inspector.
We talked about Path to Exile. Come on now.
This is 2.
Thraben Inspector is my number 2. 1 white mana gets you a 1/2 human soldier. When Thraben Inspector enters the battlefield, investigate, which means you make a colorless clue artifact token with pay 2 colorless and sacrifice it, draw a card, originally from Shadows over Innistrad. I don't love the old white borders. This fits, though. I feel like the regalness and the seriousness with which Thraben Inspector makes it fine. And also, if you're going to pick any white card, you needed to have a Squire in Time Spiral Remastered, and that means having a white 1/2, and this fits that bill.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah, I mean, this card has been compared to, this card has been given some lofty ambitions. They've called it the next Mother of Runes. They've called it, I mean, just this, and this is a very competitive slot at 1 white mana. This is exactly what you want to be doing. And, this saw a lot of play. There was a white Weenie deck in Standard. This was in the blue-white tempo decks as well. If you're doing any sort of blinking shenanigans, this is a really great way to abuse that. Sees play in Pauper as well. I mean, this is white card advantage in a color that notoriously does not have a lot of that. And, it's on theme. It's very faithful to white and just very, very good.
So Thraben Inspector to me was, it just surprised the hell out of me. I'll be honest. I didn't see this card coming. I didn't see this thing being as huge as it was. And as I was saying earlier, Strixhaven is about to be previewed as we record this episode. And they're like, hey, there's going to be a white card that says draw 3 cards on it. And I'm like, I bet it's not half as good as Thraben Inspector.
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't make a permanent. It doesn't make an artifact. It doesn't draw you cards. It doesn't tag and block as soon as, turn 1's happening. Like it's just, it does so many things. It's crazy.
Historically, white card draw, things like Pursuit of Knowledge, have not been particularly good. So
yeah, pretty poopy. Aaron, what's number 2?
My number 2 is another card that is restricted in Vintage, banned in Legacy, banned in Modern. This was a card that everybody saw coming, except for Wizards, apparently. I will never forget that GP Omaha right before this card got banned, because it was just dark days. It was just nothing but Delver decks in Modern. Like, when Delver's good in Modern, something's wrong. And it was just nothing but Delver decks and Forked Bolts. And this card just needed to be dealt with immediately. My number 2 is Treasure Cruise. Treasure Cruise is 7 colorless and a blue, but you're probably not paying that. Printed in Khans of Tarkir as a sorcery with Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this means you pay 1 colorless less for the spell, and you draw 3 cards. So it's basically an Ancestral Recall. If you are playing these older formats, it's very easy to fill up your graveyard, whether it be with Street Wraiths, Baubles, Fetch Lands, Git Probes, whatever it might be. And before you know it, you have 1 blue for this thing. And so very, very good card. Again, whoever looked at these older formats and thought, what are people going to play with? Treasure Cruise is going to be one of them. And just those vintage folks are really, really going to love this.
I mean, and Commander folks love this thing, which is terrific. It's just a common for all intents and purposes. Like, all right, so at Wizards, I want them to create a new accomplishment for any designer that happens to be in R&D. This is the achievement unlocked, which is you are going to make a card that is righteously overpowered to God. Please
And
ban
no
it in
one's gonna
everything
catch
we
it.
possibly can.
Right.
But in standard, totally fine.
Totally fine.
Totally fine. No one cares.
In standard, this was fine. And it's funny because we had fetches in standard, but that's really all we had, though. We didn't have, like, the cheap cantrips. Like, we didn't have the bolts and the brainstorms and the preordains and the forked bolts.
Gitaxian probes.
Right, chain lightnings. I mean, we were still playing Magic, but it just took us a little longer to get to that point. Yeah. But it wasn't like an older formats where you can fire this off on turn 4, where it's like, whoop, refuel. And you're just...
It is nice to have an old border one for the vintage folks.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a cool card.
I mean, like weekend one, this thing was legal in Legacy. It was dark,
yeah.
It was everywhere. All right, let's move on here to the number one choice. Ruben, what you got?
My number one is, so if I told someone that there was 4 cards more expensive than Damnation in this set, they'd be like, okay, I could probably see that. If I told them that the 4th most expensive card was Gemstone Caverns, they'd be like, that's a little weird. If I told them the 3rd most expensive was Chalice and the 2nd most expensive was Thoughtseize, they'd be like, those make sense. I bet Tarmogoyf's number 1. Turns out Tarmogoyf's the 6th most, and Sliver Legion is the most expensive.
My number 2.
Sliver Legion's my number 1 on this list. I don't understand why this is so expensive as it is, but it was printed in Future Sight and then was a gift card and is now in Spiral Remastered, and it's the most expensive card in the set, and it doesn't have the old border. It is it is a white, a blue, a black, a red, and a green for a 7/7 sliver, legendary sliver, that says that all sliver creatures get +1/+1 for each other sliver on the battlefield.
Yeah, this is one of the only 5-color slivers you can get now that is reprintable, quite frankly. One of the easiest calls that one of our dear listeners took a pie in the face for, because they felt like, Wizards would keep this $100 bill in a master set. Right. But I felt like this was the perfect, part to bring it back.
It's effectively a master set.
It's close to it, quite frankly.
It's so funny because I don't know anybody. I think I've played maybe, and this is just my experience.
I know.
So
I've never played as a sliver commander deck.
I've played one person. And this did not, and it was probably in there, but like, who was playing this? Like,
kitchen tables all over the world have slivers we never see, and Sliver Legion is at the top of their list because this thing is ridiculous. Again, this was my number 2. It's hard to go wrong. I don't know. This thing just, to me, crept up to $100. It wasn't overnight. You know what I mean? It wasn't like somebody just snapped and went to 50 to 100. It just went to 20 to 30. 30 to 40 and on up the chain until one day you were like, that's $100. That's $100, y'all. That's incredible.
Wild. Yeah.
So, Aaron, what's number 1?
My number 1 started off as being one of the more expensive cards in the set, non-foil. It's come down a little bit to about 15 or 20, which is still not bad, but this was another one of those cards that was a clear shout out to those older format players, restricted in Vintage, perfectly legal in Legacy, banned in Modern. This is really the standard for blue card draw. It's the fact that it's the card draw, but it's also your ability to kind of sculpt your next couple of draws. And in Legacy, you can just do this repeatedly, which blows my mind. My number 1 had to be Ponder. So Ponder is 1 blue. It is a sorcery, originally printed in Lorwyn, I believe. Look at the top 3 cards of your library and then put them back in any order. You may shuffle your library and then you draw a card. And so this is incredibly powerful, particularly if you're playing any sort of combo decks. But if you do happen to just play like a tempo or a fair deck, it's fine too. But, there's a reason why we can't have this in Modern. There's a reason why it's restricted in Vintage. Legacy didn't get the memo, but it's fine. This card was going for as high as $40 non-foil before the set actually came out. So there was a lot of hype around this card. We have that brilliant Dan Scott art of the three planets or the 3 moons, the hand, the face in the background. Older formats live and die by those blue draw cards, and this is the standard right here.
I mean, that sweet Secret Lair version that's coming.
I love the sweet Secret Lair version.
Is absolutely
Ponder fans
incredible.
are getting quite a bit to choose from.
I mean,
and this is the first time it's ever been old bordered too. I mean, Lorwyn was a long time ago, but not long enough ago that we got an old border version.
I mean, Champions of Kamigawa wasn't old enough to get old border stuff. But you have the conundrum. It was a thing at around 2010s and whatnot. I was talking to R&D about it, and they're like, how good can we give you card draw for 1 mana? Like, where is the line? We think it's here. It might not be here. could we ever give you a 1-mana card draw that that does literally almost anything? Because Gitaxian Probe, way too good. Ponder, it's just too good for what it does.
Right.
And it's also one of these cards that the better the player is, the better the spell is.
Yes.
So, they know what to keep, what to shuffle, when to keep it and whatnot. And it's great to watch great players use this card because, again, there's definitely been times where I've watched, LSVs or whatnot of the world be like, yep, instant shuffle, not even a question, where I'm like, I think there was a question there. I was like, I could have probably kept this and that and the other on top for this reason. But yeah, the card itself is amazing. And I just don't see Wizards making a 1 blue mana card draw spell ever again. I mean,
we're gonna get we're gonna get Serum Visions, and we're gonna have Peak, I guess, as our 2 in Modern forever, and that's about it. That's what we're gonna get.
I hope you're happy with it.
Yep.
There you go. All right, for my number 1, and we've brought it up a couple times. We've discussed it a little bit. This to me is the card that if someone were to say, sort of what sums up, Time Spiral block, what really makes it interesting, makes it unique, makes it different. And to me, it wasn't the Sliver Legion. I loved it. It was my number 2 because, it's great. It's iconic. It's cool. It's obviously one of the stars of the set and super expensive. And that's awesome. But if I'm look, when they took Magic and they flipped it upside down, they gave us Damnation. And Damnation is just so beautiful, so clean, clear. And again, just the opposite of what you were expecting. And when Time Spiral flips the script, Damnation is here for you.
This is a $29 card.
You're damn right it is.
Why is this card still so expensive?
Because it's amazing, and it's the only thing that it can do the way it does. For 2 black and 2 generic mana, it's a mythic sorcery. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated from the top rope. This is how we got introduced to Planar Chaos. The hype was off the chain. They sent us freaking $67 Texas versions in the mail for free. Holy cow. This
and it was
card
a meme
is
for a while. There was a good couple of years there where every time a new set came out, people were like, Damnation's
coming, or what?
No, it was never Damnation. And then finally it was. And it's funny because when it finally was true, I feel like it was just so quiet where Mark's like,
Modern Masters 2017,
He did an article recently. Every time a new set comes out, Mara will usually do an article kind of going behind the scenes, and sometimes we'll talk about individual cards. And Damnation was a quarter of the article.
Right.
As to why it was in Time Spiral Remastered. And so, there
was a decade gap between pack printings of Damnation.
This
so
is
there
just
was a lot
one
of
the best blackboard wipes in the game. Toxic Deluge is right up there. But, and the art of just that black hole sucking everything in. I was fortunate enough to get this really weird, felt playmat of this. It was very rare. And it has some incredible detail on it to where you can see just the scope of everything being sucked into this thing. And it's just incredible.
Yeah. And this is the card that, if there's something that's going to just turn on the nostalgia valve, it's Show Me Damnation. Yeah. Let's play blackboard wipes. It was crazy. It was great. I loved it. And
I'm going to tell you the story about one of our super fans. You guys know Queen March has an EDH, right?
Yes, yes.
They just gave me one at Command Fest. Did I tell you about that?
Yeah. Here's your
Command Fest 2019. He played against my Queen March has a deck, and he was like, do you have Damnation in there? And I was like, no, it's a little expensive. I'm more of a budget EDH player. I was like, I have whatever. And he's like, do you want one? And I'm like, how much for? He's like, do you want it? And I'm like, okay. So I now have a Damnation because of them.
Wow, that is terrific. And that was our top 10 Time Spiral Remastered cards. You'll see them on the screen right now. If you're a review, take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you what card we did not talk about. And we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Aaron.
Suns out, buns out.
Thank you, Ruben.
Really just a home run, this set of things to reprint. Only a couple of misses. I'm going to be upset if I open a Temur Ascendancy. But but it's a way lower percentage of misses. And they did a really good job.
If you open a Temur Ascendancy, Ruben, you have to promise that you're going to sing it like Kasha does. It's going down. I'm yelling Temur. You got to do that.
Yeah, I'll cut it in half.
Moving to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsors, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsors, CardHoarder.com and AlterSleeves.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching and listening, and hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv at MagicMikes, on Twitter at MagicMikesCast, our Magic Mike subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Or join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.